Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it is time to have a look at some suggestions which were passed to developers in May of 2020. Yes, we have a new list of stuff which was passed to developers, and I think what we're going to do this time, so we're going to do an aviation video, ground video, and then we might mix the naval and helicopter stuff, because the suggestions for them, there aren't a lot of them right now, so we'll have to see what goes on. Anyway, in this video we're going to cover the aviation portion, and why not start off with a very interesting vehicle. We have from Atomic Gamer NL, the Skypirate. Now, if you don't know what the Skypirate is, it is a beautiful aircraft, as you can see right here. It is definitely a wonder to see. And it was one of the most interesting ideas of the Second World War. It had a lot of stuff which makes it unique, and we'll go through it right now. So obviously the Douglas XTB-2D Skypirate was first looked at as an idea in 1939. The designers Ed Heinemann and also Bob Donovan were looking to replace the TBD Devastator torpedo bomber, and in 1942, the team led by them worked on a new project which was named the Devastator II. And on the 31st of October 1943, 4 days after the new Midway-class aircraft carriers were ordered into production, Douglas received a contract for 2 prototypes. They were going to be designated the TB-2D, receiving the official name the Sky Pirate. So the TB-2D, it was powered by a Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp Major and it also drove contra-rotating props, as you can see, and the general idea of what it would be able to carry was 4 torpedoes. 4 torpedoes, you hear that right, or an equivalent bomb load on the underwing pylons. The defensive armament would be 2 20mm in the wings, and also a 50 cal gun mounted in a power-operated dorsal turret. So therefore you'd have quite a nice way of being able to cover yourself. The engine itself was huge. It was the largest ever carrier-borne aircraft at the time, and it could carry 4 times the weapon loadout of the TBF Avenger, and the only real problem that it had was the fact that because it was so big, it was only able to fit on the CVB and the CV9 carriers, and this meant that the overall design, even though it did fly, it was put together, it was cancelled in the 20th of May 1944 because it just couldn't fit the bill, unfortunately. But I still think it would be interesting to see. You could have it in the 20mm configuration, or you could have the configuration of the 4 wing-mounted 50 cals, the 2 50 cal machine guns in the dorsal turret, and the 1 in the ventral bath, and it could carry up to 8,400 pounds worth of ordnance, or as talked about before, 4 torpedoes. How insane is that? How ridiculous is that? It is just an insane amount. Now, carrying on the naval theme, we now have one from Milocat, which is talking about a new Ju-87. Oops. Well, this isn't good. But basically, when it comes to the Ju-87, and none of these pictures going to work for us here. There we go. So the Ju-87, which is being talked about in this, is the D4. Now, if you don't know, there's a bunch of planes created by the Luftwaffe which were designed for carrier use. This was because of the building of the Graf Zeppelin aircraft carrier. Now, the Graf Zeppelin aircraft carrier was never finished. It was never something which actually worked, and was never done to completion, and there was stuff like the Bf-109T, which was supposed to be a carrier-borne Bf-109, and this is the Ju-87 version, which was supposed to be the version which would have been the carrier-borne Ju-87. They added a bunch of different stuff to it. They strengthened its airframe, they added tail hooks for carrier operations, and they also modified it so it would allow to use the LT-850 torpedo. They also replaced the guns, because this was based off a modified version of the D1 and the D3 Stukas. So they replaced the 792s with 20mm MG151s, and also what they did was they added more ammunition for the rear gunner, giving him a total of 2,000 rounds. So because of the fact that the Graf Zeppelin aircraft carrier was never actually finished, only a few of these were actually built, and then they were later remodified into the D3 or D5 standard. And it would be cool to see this in game, because obviously we don't really have a torpedo-borne Ju-87, but at the same time, in history, it didn't really take much of a place. But yeah, it would be nice to see. The next one is from F. Fish, and this is talking about the IS-1 and the IS-2. Now, you may be thinking, how does an IS-1 or an IS-2 fly? They're tanks. Well, these were actually planes which came out in the early area of the Second World War, 1940s and the 1941, and these actually have a interesting idea to them, if you can see right here. So they actually have a foldable wing, which is a really cool little idea to them, and I'm trying to find the pictures of them. I think it would be probably this one here. Yeah, you can see the foldable wings here, where the bottom wings of this biplane and also the wheels would fold into the fuselage itself in this picture right here. How cool is that? Something that you don't really see that too much of when it comes to general planes. So let's talk about these vehicles after, having a look at the retractable landing gear stuff. So both of these, there were two prototypes in 1941 and 1940, and the idea of merging the best features of biplanes and also monoplanes. The reason why these things are called the ISs, such as the IS-1 and IS-2, is because it stands for Istrebitel Skladnoi, which means folding fighter. And the main feature of the planes was obviously the ability to fold in flight the lower wing into the fuselage and upper wing. This allowed the pilot to transition from a biplane configuration to a clean monoplane one. So you could actually have a monoplane, or you could have a biplane configuration, depending on what you wanted to see. Now, when it comes to the IS-1 and the IS-2, the general differences between them is the IS-1 had the 900 horsepower Shvedstov M63 9-cylinder radial engine. The IS-2 had the 1100 horsepower Tumansky 14-cylinder radial engine, and the guns were slightly different. So the IS-1 had 4 7.62 Shikasses, which you will know from the lower tiers of aviation in the game, and then the IS-2 had access to 2 7.62s, but it also had access to 2 12.7s. So that's the basic difference between them. I would love to see these, just because they are very much interesting designs. And the fact that you have this foldable wing scenario, I think, is really, really interesting. Something that you don't see too much of when it comes to general aircraft design. The next one is the Fairey Fulmer. Now, if you don't know what the Fairey Fulmer is, it's the big boy. It's something which was used a lot by the British, not to great effect, but, it was still used. So let's go through its wonderful design. So this is from Milo Cat, and the Fairey Fulmer that you see before you, it was a British carrier fighter which was developed and used in the early years of World War II. It entered service for the Royal Navy in 1940, and it was created to provide a modern carrier fighter which would replace the Sea Gladiators which were used before. It also was designed to be better than the Blackburn Skua, which was the multi-role at the time, and it was developed from the Fairey battle dive bomber, and the Fulmer was a large and bulky but tough and sturdy design. It boasted a long range, it was considered quite desirable for naval scouting and also long-distance operations. It also had some really nice landing gear on it, so you could land hard, and also there, if you have a look at the general set of people that were in the aircraft, you had the pilot, and then there was a second crew member who was a navigator and also a radio operator, and the idea was that they would remain in constant contact with the aircraft carrier and allow fighters to return home even in rough weather after long flights, so that extra little bit of safety, I suppose. The armament on the first Fulmer was 8 7.7mm Browning machine guns. This would be around about the same as the Spitfires and the Hurricanes around the time, but the Fulmer actually carried way more ammunition. The Mark I would carry 750 rounds per gun, and the Mark II would carry 1,000 rounds per gun. So the Mark II would have 8,000 7.7mm rounds on it, just to put that into perspective. So it was used, as we said, as a carrier fighter and a defensive aircraft, but it wasn't very good. If you compare it to a lot of the fighters that it was fighting, BF-109s, Focke-Wulfs and stuff like that, it was seen as often too slow to keep up with enemy aircraft, and also too slow to keep them in firing range for a long time. So even though it was a massive improvement over the previous fighters that they were using, the Sea Gladiators, it still had issues with its flight capabilities. Also, this coupled with the weakness of the 7.7mm guns made the aircraft hard to use in order to get kills with it. So therefore in the Mark II, the aircraft switched the 7.7mm machine guns for 12.7mm weapons. So some of the aircraft were also converted into night fighter variants. These were given 50 cal machine guns and also radar, and the night fighters actually saw use until 1945, where the standard Fulmers were retired from frontline carrier use by 1942, and they were replaced by the Seafires, and they were also replaced by the mastless aircraft. Now, there was continuing designs or further design improvements with the Fulmer, and that eventually turned into the Fairey Firefly, which of course, you all know and love. So it would be lovely to see the Fulmer in game, even though I don't think it'll be too useful. Maybe it'll be a fun little event aircraft at some point to add to the game. The next vehicles to have a look at are from Satoru and Ibuki, and we're talking about the Ki-12 and the Ki-11. So these wonderful things. Some more large, heavy Japanese 1930s bombers. So the Mitsubishi Ki-1 was also known as the Mitsubishi Army Type 93 Heavy Bomber. It was a bomber built by Mitsubishi for the Imperial Japanese Army in the 1930s, and it flew for the first time in 1933. Even though it looked incredibly old, the Ki-1 was used in Manchukuo and also in North China during the early stages of the Second Sino-Japanese War, and it also it was mainly used when the Japanese had complete air superiority, so they didn't have to worry about it getting shot down. The design was upgraded then to the Ki-12, and what this had was a strengthened airframe. It also had a slightly more powerful engines, the 723 horsepower Mitsubishi HA23 V12s, and this increased its speed to 230 miles per hour, kilometers per hour, or 140 miles per hour. So even with the new engines, the Ki-1 was still seen as underpowered and was unable to maintain altitude during single-engine flights, and this proved to be a serious issue during the aircraft's operational service due to the lack of reliability of the engines themselves. It was eventually replaced in 1937 by the Fiat BR20, a bit of Italian influence. So Looking at the vehicle itself, the general armament you're looking for is 377mm on it. You had a front gunner, tail gunner, and also belly gunner, and the bombs it could carry was 1,500 kilos. So it's another one of these 1930s aircraft with a crazy bomb load, but could hardly stay in the air. So that's probably the way to look at it. It would be nice to see one of the versions in game, probably the second one, so it isn't as frustrating to use. The next vehicle to have a look at is from Zombificus, and what we're talking about here is a BT-32, but not just your standard BT-32. This is a BT-32 with a few bells and whistles. The Curtiss BT-32 Condor II, it was a 1930s export bomber conversion of the Curtiss T-32, a T-32 biplane passenger airliner, which was operated by the Chinese Kuomintang as both a bomber and also a personal transport of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. It was anachronistic in appearance, but it did actually have a lot of nice little ideas to it, and generally it wasn't too fast. Its engines were pretty powerful, but the machine itself was overall quite heavy, and it was decently well armed compared to a lot of other machines that we see. So the first thing is obviously being based off a biplane airliner is a pretty interesting, a general idea. But when it was converted into the bomber version, the USAAC was not interested. It had its own bomber program in motion, so therefore it was looked for export to be able to sell it. So it went to Peru, Colombia, and also China. The plane had bomb racks under the wings for up to 1,800 kilos of ordnance, and also a respectable payload for the time, definitely was, and it could be armed with up to 5 machine guns. But it's a little bit confusing where these machine guns are. There is definitely different sources and different beliefs on where these are. So here's the general look of it, so you can see where some of them are, but not all of them. So with 5 machine guns on it, there were definitely 2 dorsal turrets on it. There was one above the nose and one between the wings and tails. There also seemed to have only carried 1 gun each. There was also 2 machine guns in waist positions, which leaves the position of the 5th one, which could be really anywhere. Now, the general belief is the 5th one was an offensive armament which was fixed firing going forward, so therefore this could be used with tow with the pilot or the co-pilot, but there doesn't seem to be too much confirmation of where it is, so yeah, that is something to think about. So offensive armament would be 177, defensive armament would be 2 to 4 77s, and the payload overall would be 1,800 kilos for this machine. So that would definitely be very interesting as a bomber. The next one is once again from Zombificus, and what we're talking about here is a post-war machine, which doesn't get a lot of credence, but it really should. So this is French. It's the Dassault MD 311 Flamant, and as it was known, the Furious Flamingo. It was a bombing and navigation trainer variant of the MD-30 family of light transport planes, and the only model of the line to see an active combat role. And in the 1954 to 1962 Algerian War of Independence, the MD-311s of the Armée de l'Air flew ground attack missions against National Liberation Forces using bombs and rockets, and also, in a world first, the ATGMs. The Flamant itself isn't a particularly well-known plane. As the first fixed-wing aircraft to fire ATGMs in anger, it made history, in particular by influencing French military doctrine towards launching ATGMs from attack helicopters. It was an experiment that resulted in another world first. In a more peaceful role, the MD-311 and its siblings, the MD-312 and the 315, served on with France until 1982, along with some other nations like Vietnam, Tunisia, and also Cambodia. Even Madagascar and Cameroon were able to get in on the action. So in recognition of its historically important missile armament, but otherwise unremarkable performance, it would be nice to see when it comes to the overall game. If you want to see what it looks like with the ATGMs, you can see it let's see if there's an actual picture. There you go. So this is how they were mounted on the vehicle. So the MD-311's armaments were put to the test after they were tested, obviously, but they were put to the test for the first time in the 1954 Algerian War. It provided close air support to French troops opposing the National Liberation Forces fighting for Algerian independence from French colonial rule. And the Algerians didn't have much in the way of heavy armor, so the Flamant's bombs and rockets and machine guns were sufficient for most air support missions, but the French soon encountered a problem none of their aircraft could solve. The NLF had taken to using heavily fortified caves hidden high up in the mountains, and these fortifications would be suicide to assault on the ground, but none of the French aircraft were small enough to fly down the deep, jagged gorges to attack the mouth of the caves, carried sufficiently accurate armament to hit them, or enough ship payload not to need accuracy. So the solution came with a stock of SS-11 ATGMs, which were delivered in 1956, the missile's first year of service, which were fitted to the 9 modified MD-311s and used to attack the until then untouchable caves. So this thing did actually have a pretty cool part in history because of that fact. They were able to use it to a decent amount, and obviously in War Thunder, when we have a look at it, because of its hard points, it gives it a lot of options. So it was powered by 2 SNECMA 12S02-201 piston engines, maximum speed of 380 kilometers per hour, and looking at its payload options, because it had a primary armament of 2 nose-mounted 50 cals and the hard points, so it could either carry 4 50-kilo bombs, 4 105mm Brandt T-10 air-to-ground rockets, 4 68mm Matra rocket pods, 2 Nord Aviation AS-11 ATGMs, or 4 Nord Aviation AS-11 ATGMs, or 6 of them. So this thing could definitely be a propeller aircraft in War Thunder that could carry ATGMs in the form of AS-11s. Will be a little bit of fun. Maybe this will be a fun event vehicle, but overall a nice little end to what we have seen through this aviation, that is suggestions passed to developers. Thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day. I'd like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Battling Bacon, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Conte Baraka, Daniel Stanton, Elove Goat, Jay Wilt, Martinez, Trigger Hippie, Universe, Eugens Terry, and also I'm Devilish and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.